The 6'7" mountain of a man slammed his fist against the weathered oak table, making Cordelia's teacup rattle in its saucer. "Damn it, woman! You can't keep refusing my help." Bronson Cade's voice thundered through the cramped kitchen. Of the rundown farmhouse, his storm-gray eyes blazing with frustration and something far more dangerous raw, unrestrained desire. Cordelia Whitmore pressed herself against the kitchen counter, her emerald eyes flashing with defiance even as her heart hammered against her ribs. The giant cowboy had been circling her like a predator for months, ever since her husband Jeremiah had been found dead in the creek, leaving her with nothing but debts and a failing farm in the Montana Territory. "I don't need your charity, Bronson." "Cade," she hissed, her widow's black dress doing nothing to diminish the fire in her spirit, "I'll make my own way." A bitter laugh escaped his lips as he stepped closer, his massive frame dwarfing her petite form. The scent of leather and wild sage clung to him, making her pulse race despite her anger. "Charity, is that what you think this is?" His calloused hand shot out, gripping her chin with surprising gentleness. "Look around you, Cordelia. The roof's got more holes than a colander, the barn's ready to collapse, and winter's coming fast. You'll be dead before the first snow melts." She tried to jerk away, but his thumb traced the delicate line of her jaw, sending shivers down her spine. "Let me go, you brute. Not until you hear what I'm offering?" His voice dropped to a husky whisper that made her knees weak. "Marry me, Cordelia. Let me take care of you the way a woman like you deserves." "Marriage?" The word came out as a strangled gasp. "You barely know me, and I know enough." His free hand settled on her waist, spanning nearly half her torso. "I know you're proud as a wildcat and twice as fierce. I know you cry yourself to sleep at night thinking no one can hear. I know that fire in your belly burns hotter than a forge when you're riled up." Heat flooded her cheeks. "You arrogant, I know you want me to." The words hung between them like a loaded gun. His thumb brushed across her lower lip, and she couldn't suppress the shudder that ran through her. "I've seen the way you watch me when you think I'm not looking, the way you bite that pretty lip when I get too close." Cordelia's breath came in shallow pants. The truth of his words hit like a physical blow. She did want him, had wanted him. Since the day he'd carried her husband's body home, his shirt soaked with creek water, and his eyes dark with sympathy. But wanting and having were two different things entirely. "Even if that were true," she whispered, "I won't be any man's obligation." "I won't be obligation?" Bronson's laugh was harsh, almost pained. He pressed closer, trapping her against the counter, his massive body radiating heat. "Woman, you've got it all wrong. You're not my obligation, you're my obsession." The raw honesty in his voice made her gasp. His hands cupped her face now, thumbs stroking her cheekbones as he stared down at her with an intensity that made her soul ache. "I've wanted you since the day Jeremiah brought you to town as his bride." He confessed, his voice rough as sandpaper. "Spent 2 years in hell watching another man touch what should have been mine. I won't waste another day pretending I don't burn for you, Bronson." His name fell from her lips like a prayer. "Say yes," he demanded, his forehead resting against hers. "Say yes, and by winter you'll have my son growing inside you. Say yes, and I'll show you what it means to be cherished by a man who'd burned down the world before he'd let anyone hurt you." The promise in his words, the fierce protection she saw blazing in his eyes, shattered the last of her resistance. But before she could speak, the sound of approaching horses thundered through the valley, and Cordelia's blood turned to ice. Her late husband's creditors had come to collect. 3 men dismounted outside Cordelia's farmhouse, their spurs jangling, like warning bells against the porch steps. Bronson's massive frame stiffened as he recognized the lead rider, Vance Holloway, the territory's most ruthless debt collector, flanked by his 2 hired guns, Colt and Slade. "Mrs. Whitmore." Holloway's voice carried the false charm of a snake oil salesman as he hammered on the front door. "I believe we have business to discuss." Bronson's hand instinctively moved to the Colt .45 holstered at his hip. "Stay behind." "Me," he growled to Cordelia, his protective instincts flaring like wildfire. "No." Cordelia straightened her spine, smoothing her skirts with trembling hands. "This is my debt, my problem. I won't hide like a frightened child. Before Bronson could protest, she marched to the door and flung it open. Holloway's cold blue eyes swept over her appreciatively, making Bronson's jaw clench with barely contained violence. "Gentlemen," Cordelia said, her voice steady, despite the fear Bronson could smell on her skin. "I assume you're here about Jeremiah's debts?" "Indeed we are, ma'am." Holloway removed his hat with exaggerated politeness, revealing thinning hair slicked back with pomade. "Your late husband owed my employer quite a considerable sum, nearly $3,000 to be precise." Bronson saw Cordelia's face go pale, but she didn't flinch. "I'm aware of the debt, Mr. Holloway. However, I don't have that kind of money." "Oh, but you do, Mrs. Whitmore." Holloway's smile was predatory. His farm, the livestock, even that pretty little mare in the stable-it, all adds up. "Of course, there are alternative arrangements we could discuss." The way his gaze raked over Cordelia's body made Bronson see red. He stepped into view, his towering presence filling the doorframe like an approaching storm. "Holloway." Bronson's voice was deadly quiet, the kind of calm that preceded violence. "I suggest you state your business and move on." The debt collector's face hardened. "Cade might have known you'd be sniffing around the grieving widow." His eyes glittered with malice. "But this doesn't concern you. The lady has debts to pay." "Actually," Cordelia said, her chin lifting with newfound determination, "Mr. Cade and I were just discussing our engagement." Bronson's heart slammed against his ribs. She was claiming him publicly, in front of witnesses. The implications sent heat rushing through his veins. Holloway's smile faltered. "Engagement, you say? How, ... convenient. But I'm afraid debts don't disappear with marriage vows." "Mrs. Whitmore, the money is still owed." "Then I'll pay it." Bronson stepped forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over the smaller man. "Every cent, with interest." Colt and Slade shifted nervously, hands hovering near their weapons. They might be fast, but Bronson Cade was legendary. With a gun and, they knew it, you'd pay $3,000 for a woman's debts. Holloway's laugh was sharp with disbelief. She must be something special in bed. Cordelia gasped, but before she could react, Bronson moved with deadly grace. His hand shot out, gripping Holloway by the throat and lifting him clean off his feet. "Apologize," Bronson said quietly, "or I'll snap your neck like a twig." Holloway's face purpled as he clawed at Bronson's iron grip. "Can tote. Breathe." Bronson. Cordelia's soft touch on his arm was the only thing that could have reached him through his rage. "Let him go. Please." For a moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Then Bronson released Holloway, who collapsed to his knees, gasping. "Have 1 week," Bronson said, not taking his eyes off the other men's hands. "I'll have your money by then." "This isn't over, Cade." Holloway wheezed as his men helped him to his feet. 3,000. 1 week. Or the woman's hours. As the three rode away, Cordelia turned to Bronson with tears in her eyes. "You can't pay that kind of money for me. I won't let you bankrupt yourself." Bronson cupped her face in his hands, his gray eyes burning with fierce possession. "It's too late for second thoughts now, darling. You claimed me in front of witnesses. It's by Montana law. That makes you mine to protect." That night, as rain hammered against the farmhouse roof, Cordelia paced the kitchen like a caged wildcat, the magnitude of what she'd done, claiming Bronson as her fiancé, binding him to her debts, gnawed at her conscience with merciless teeth. "Stop wearing a hole in my floor and come here." Bronson's deep voice rumbled from where he sat cleaning, his rifle at the kitchen table, having refused to leave her alone after Holloway's threats. "Your floor?" Cordelia whirled to face him, emerald eyes blazing. "This is still my house, Bronson Cade, and I'll pace wherever I please." A slow smile tugged at his lips as he set down the rifle. "Our house, once we're wed. And that's happening. Tomorrow. Tomorrow?" The word came out as a strangled squeak. "You can't be serious. Dead serious." He rose from the chair, his massive frame unfolding with predatory grace. "I'm riding to town at first light to get the preacher. We'll be married before noon." Cordelia's heart hammered against her ribs as he stalked toward her. "But we barely know each other. We've never even what?" His voice dropped to a husky whisper as he backed her against the wall. His hands braced on either side of her head. He's never even kissed. Her breath caught as his thumb traced her lower lip. Bronson, we shouldn't. What? Shouldn't. Give in to what's been burning between us for months. His mouth hovered inches from hers, his breath warm against her skin. Tell me you don't want this, Cordelia. Tell me you don't dream about my hands on your body and I'll walk away right now. The honest truth blazed in her eyes before she could hide it. I can't. Then stop fighting what we both want. His lips brushed against hers, featherlight, teasing. Let me show you how a man treats the woman he's going to marry. When she didn't pull away, Bronson's control snapped. His mouth claimed hers in a kiss that was part possession, part desperation. Cordelia melted against him, her hands fisting in his shirt as he kissed her with a hunger that made her knees weak. God, you taste like heaven, he groaned against. Her lips, his large hands spanning her waist. I've imagined this so many times, Bronson. His name fell from her lips like a prayer as he trailed kisses down her throat. We can't. I'm still in mourning. Jeremiah's been dead 6 months, Bronson said gently, his hands framing her face. Long are you going to punish yourself for surviving? Tears sprang to her eyes. He was a good man. He deserved better than a wife. What? Who's alive who deserves happiness? Bronson's gray eyes blazed with fierce protectiveness. You'd think he'd want you to waste away in this falling down house, too proud to accept help? But $3,000 is nothing compared to having you in my bed every night for the rest of my life. His admission was raw, honest. Got money, Cordelia. More than most folks in this territory know. The cattle ranch isn't my only investment. Her eyes widened. What do you mean? I own shares in 3 silver mines up in the mountains. Been investing for years, waiting for the right time to build something permanent. His thumb brushed away a tear from her cheek, waiting for the right woman to build it with. And you think I'm that woman? She whispered. I know you are. I lifted her easily, setting her on the kitchen counter so they were eye to eye. You've got fire in your soul and steel in your spine. You're exactly what I need. Before she could respond, his mouth was on hers again, and this time Cordelia didn't fight the hunger that consumed her. She kissed him back with a desperation. That shocked them both, her hands tangling in his dark hair. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Bronson rested his forehead against hers. Marry me tomorrow, he said quietly. Let me make you mine in every way that matters. Let me fill this house with our children and your laughter. Looking into his storm-gray eyes, seeing the naked longing there, Cordelia finally surrendered to the inevitable. Yes, she whispered. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, with golden sunlight streaming through the kitchen windows as Cordelia stood before her cracked mirror, trying to tame her unruly copper curls. She'd chosen her best dress, a deep blue silk that had been her wedding dress before she dyed it after Jeremiah's death. You look beautiful. Bronson's reflection appeared behind hers in the mirror, and she gasped at the sight of him. He'd cleaned up, trading his worn work clothes for a black suit that stretched magnificently across his broad shoulders. His dark hair was slicked back, and he'd shaved, revealing the strong line of his jaw. You clean up well yourself, Mr. Cade? Her voice came out breathier than she intended as he stepped closer, his hands settling on her shoulders. Mrs. Cade. Has a nice ring to it, he murmured, pressing a gentle kiss to the curve of her neck. You ready for this? Before she could answer, the sound of approaching horses made them both freeze. Through the window, Cordelia saw not just Preacher Morris in his black buggy, but half the town following behind, including several of the local women who'd whispered behind their hands about the indecent haste of her engagement. Looks like we've got ourselves an audience, Bronson said dryly. Hope you don't mind a public wedding. Mind gossipy old biddies, Cordelia muttered. But her hand found his and squeezed. I suppose they'll talk regardless. The ceremony was brief, but intense. Preacher Maurice, a kind man who'd known both Cordelia and Bronson since they were children, spoke of love, commitment, and the sacred bond between husband and wife. But all Cordelia could focus on was the way Bronson's gray eyes never left her face, as if she were the only woman in the world. Do you, Bronson Cade, take Cordelia Whitmore to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, till death do you part? I do. His voice rang out clear and strong, sending shivers down Cordelia's spine. And do you, Cordelia Whitmore, take Bronson Cade to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, till death do you part? Her voice caught slightly as she looked into his eyes. I do. The power vested in me by the territory of Montana, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Preacher Maurice smiled warmly. You may kiss your bride, Bronson. The kiss was supposed to be chaste, appropriate for the watching crowd. But the moment Bronson's lips touched hers, fire exploded between them. His large hands cupped her face, as he kissed her with a passion that made several of the ladies gasp and fan themselves vigorously when they finally broke apart. Both breathing hard, applause and whistles erupted from the gathered crowd, but Cordelia barely heard them. All she could see was the blazing hunger in her new husband's eyes. Mrs. Cade, he said formally, but his voice was rough with barely leashed desire. Mr. Cade, she replied, her cheeks burning. The crowd surged forward with congratulations, and for the next hour, Cordelia found herself swept up in handshakes and well wishes. Several of the women who'd been coldest to her during her widowhood now smiled warmly, eager to curry favor with Bronson Cade's new wife, as the sun began to set and the guests finally departed. Cordelia found herself alone with her husband for the first time since the ceremony. The weight of what they'd done, what was expected of them, now settled over her like a heavy blanket. Having second thoughts? Bronson asked gently, reading her expression with uncanny accuracy. No, she said quickly, then more softly. Yes. Maybe. I don't know. He crossed to her, taking her hands in his massive ones. We can take this slow, darlin'. I'm not going to demand my husbandly rights just because we've got a piece of paper. But you want to, she said. Not a question, but a statement. His eyes darkened. God, yes. But I want you willing, eager, not just resigned to your duty. Looking up at him, this giant of a man who'd married her to save her farm, Cordelia made her choice. Then make me eager, she whispered. Bronson's sharp intake of breath filled the sudden silence between them. His hands tightened on hers, and Cordelia could see the war between desire and restraint playing out in his storm-gray eyes. You sure about that, darlin'? His voice was rough as gravel. Because once I start touching you the way I want to, there won't be any going back. Instead of answering with words, Cordelia reached up and began unbuttoning his vest, her fingers trembling but determined. I've been halfly for 6 months, Bronson. Show me what it means to feel again. A low growl rumbled in his chest as he caught her hands, stilling them. Not here. Not in this kitchen where you cooked for another man. His eyes blazed with possessive fire. Upstairs. In our bed. The word "our" sent heat spiraling through her belly as he swept her up in his arms, carrying her effortlessly toward the narrow staircase. Cordelia buried her face against his neck, breathing in his scent of leather and sage, her lips finding the pulse that hammered beneath his skin. Christ, woman, he groaned, nearly stumbling on the stairs as she nipped at his throat. Going to kill me before we reach the bedroom? The room that had been her prison of grief was transformed by moonlight and shadow. Bronson set her down beside the bed, his large hands framing her face as he studied her in the silver light. Last chance to change your mind, he said quietly, but she could see the hunger burning in his eyes like wildfire. I don't want to change. My mind, her hands found the buttons of his shirt, and this time he didn't stop her. I want to forget everything but you. His control snapped like a rope pulled too tight. His mouth crashed down on hers in a kiss that was part desperation, part worship. Large hands tangled in her copper curls as he backed her toward the bed, his lips trailing fire down her throat. Beautiful, he murmured against her skin as he slowly unlaced her dress. I've dreamed of this so many nights, Cordelia gasped. As cool air hit her heated skin, but Bronson's reverent touch chased away any self-consciousness. His hands, so large and strong, were infinitely gentle as they mapped every curve and hollow of her body. You're perfect, he breathed, and the wonder in his voice made tears spring to her eyes. Bronson, she whispered, her hands exploring the magnificent expanse of his chest. Please. He needed no further encouragement. With infinite care, he joined their bodies, both of them crying out at the perfection of the connection. For a moment, they simply held each other, overwhelmed by the intensity of what they were sharing. Then he began to move, and Cordelia's world shattered into starlight. Every touch, every kiss, every whispered endearment drove her higher until she thought she might die from the pleasure of it. She clung to his broad shoulders, her nails digging into his skin as waves of sensation crashed over her. Let go, darling, he commanded against her ear, his own voice strained with need. I've got you. Let go. When release finally claimed her, it was with a cry that seemed torn from her very soul. Bronson followed her over the edge moments later, her name on his lips like a prayer. Afterward, they lay tangled together, their breathing slowly returning to normal. Bronson's arms encircled her like bands of steel, holding her against his chest as if he feared she might disappear. No regrets? He asked quietly, his fingers combing through her disheveled hair. Cordelia lifted her head to look at him, seeing vulnerability in his gray eyes, despite his confident demeanor. Only that we waited so long, relief flooded his features. Good, because I'm not letting you go. Ever possessive, aren't you? She teased, but her heart sang at his words. Completely. His hand settled over her flat stomach with unmistakable intent. And I meant what I said yesterday. By winter, you'll be carrying my child. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it filled her with a warm contentment she hadn't felt in years. Is that a promise, Mr. Cade? His smile was pure male. Satisfaction. That's a vow, Mrs. Cade. One I intend to keep. 3 weeks later, Cordelia hummed as she kneaded bread dough. Flour dusting her apron and contentment warming her from the inside out. Marriage to Bronson had transformed not just her circumstances, but her entire world. The farmhouse had been repaired, the barn rebuilt. Their bed was a haven of passion and tenderness. She was just sliding the loaves into the oven when the thunder of approaching horses shattered the peaceful morning. Through the window, she saw a sight that made her blood run cold: Vance Holloway and his men. But this time, they weren't alone. At least a dozen riders followed them, all armed and looking for trouble. Bronson emerged from the barn, his hand instinctively moving to his gun as he saw the approaching threat. Even at a distance, Cordelia could see the tension in his massive frame as he strode toward the house. Stay inside, he commanded as he entered the kitchen, but Cordelia was already reaching for the shotgun above the fireplace. Like hell, I will. This is my fight too. Before Bronson could argue, Holloway's voice boomed across the yard. Cade, come on out and face me like a man. They stepped onto the porch together, Bronson's Colt ready in his hand, Cordelia's shotgun, aimed steadily at the mounted men. Holloway sat his horse with arrogant confidence, but his two hired guns looked nervous. They'd heard the stories about Bronson Cade's speed with a gun. Holloway, Bronson's voice was deadly calm. You're trespassing on my land? Your land? Holloway laughed harshly. Funny thing about that, see, I did some digging, and it turns out your pretty little wife here doesn't just owe money, she owes it to some very dangerous people. People who don't take kindly to being cheated. Cordelia's stomach dropped as a new rider emerged from behind Holloway's men. The man was small, well-dressed, and radiated a cold menace that made even Holloway look like a harmless schoolboy. Now, me to introduce Vincent Blackthorne, Holloway continued, his smile cruel. Turns out your late husband wasn't just a drunk and a fool, he was a thief. He stole from Mr. Blackthorne's gambling operation before he conveniently drowned himself. Blackthorne's pale eyes fixed on Cordelia with reptilian coldness. Mrs. Cade, how lovely to finally meet the woman who cost me $10,000. 10,000? Cordelia gasped. That's impossible. Jeremiah never had that kind of money. Nobody had access to it. And when he lost it all at my tables, he thought he could just disappear. Blackthorne's smile was razor thin. Fortunately for him, I have a very long memory and very efficient trackers. Bronson stepped protectively in front of his wife. You have a problem with a dead man? That's your lookout. Cordelia owes you nothing. Ah, but that's where you're wrong. Blackthorn produced a legal document from his coat. According to territorial law, a widow inherits all of her husband's debts. Now that she's remarried, those debts belong to you, Mr. Cade. $10,000, Holloway said with evident satisfaction, plus interest. Call it $15,000, and we'll consider the matter closed. Bronson's jaw clenched. Even his considerable wealth couldn't absorb that kind of hit without serious consequences. And if I refuse? Blackthorn's smile was genuinely terrifying. Then I collect the debt in other ways. Your wife is quite lovely, and there are always gentlemen willing to pay premium prices for quality merchandise. The threat hung in the air like poison gas. Bronson's hand twitched toward his gun, but they were outnumbered 6-1. Even his legendary speed wouldn't save them against those odds. You have 48 hours, Blackthorn continued conversationally. Bring me the money, or I take the woman. Your choice. As the riders wheeled and thundered away, Cordelia sagged against the porch railing, her face pale as moonlight.
I won't
let you bankrupt yourself for my dead husband's crimes, she whispered. There has to be another way. Bronson's arms came around her, strong and protective. There is another way, he said grimly. But you're not going to like it. No. Cordelia's voice was flat with finality as she stared at her husband across there. Kitchen table? Absolutely not. Bronson's jaw was set in granite lines. It's the only way, darlin'. I challenge Blackthorn to a gunfight. Winner takes all. And if you lose? She slammed her palm against the table, making the coffee cups jump. If you die, what happens to me then? I won't lose. His confidence was absolute, but Cordelia could see the shadows in his storm-gray eyes. You can't know that. Tears burned. Her throat, I won't be responsible for another husband's death. Before Bronson could respond, a soft knock at the door interrupted them. Cordelia's heart sank, expecting more trouble, but instead found herself face to face with an elegantly dressed woman she didn't recognize. Mrs. Cade? I'm Victoria Ashford. The woman's cultured voice held a slight tremor. I believe we need to talk about Vincent Blackthorn. An hour later, the three of them sat around the kitchen table while Victoria told a story that made Cordelia's blood run cold. She'd been Blackthorn's mistress for 2 years, privy to his illegal activities, and growing increasingly horrified by his cruelty. He keeps detailed records of everything, Victoria explained, her hand shaking as she sipped her tea. Every illegal gambling operation, every loan, every disposal of people who crossed him, it's all documented in his private safe. You telling us this? Bronson asked suspiciously. Victoria's composed facade cracked, because he's planning to kill you both regardless. He doesn't just want the money, he wants to make an example. And because... She took a shuddering breath. Because he killed my brother when he couldn't pay his debts. I've been waiting 2 years for a chance at revenge. Hope flickered in Cordelia's chest. You're saying we could expose him to the territorial authorities? More than that? Victoria reached into her reticule and produced a small brass key. Have the key to his safe. Tonight, while he's at the saloon celebrating his inevitable victory over you, we can get the evidence we need to hang him. The plan was dangerous, but it was their only alternative to a gunfight that could leave Bronson dead and Cordelia at Blackthorn's mercy. As darkness fell, Victoria led them through the back alleys of town to Blackthorn's rented house. Safe was hidden behind a painting in his study, and Victoria's key turned smoothly in the lock. Inside, they found exactly what she'd promised ledgers detailing years of criminal activity. Correspondence with corrupt officials, and most damning of all, a detailed confession written in Blackthorn's own hand as insurance against his partners. Got. Then Bronson whispered, stuffing the papers inside his coat. But as they turned to leave, footsteps sounded in the hallway. Well, what have we here? Blackthorn stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 armed men. His pale eyes glittered with malicious amusement. Dear Victoria, I really hoped you were. Smarter than this? Victoria whispered to Cordelia, then launched herself at Blackthorn with a scream of pure rage. Chaos erupted. Bronson's gun appeared in his hand as if by magic, dropping one of Blackthorn's men with a single shot. Cordelia grabbed a heavy brass candlestick and brought it down on the second gunman's head just as he aimed at her husband. When the dust settled, Blackthorn lay groaning on the floor with Victoria's knee in his back, while his men were either unconscious or dead. "Territorial Marshal's going to be very interested in these documents," Bronson said with satisfaction, waving the papers. "I'd say your debt-collecting days are over, Blackthorn." 6 months later, as winter's first snow began to fall, Cordelia pressed her hand to her gently rounded belly and smiled. True to his vow, Bronson had indeed given her his son. The doctor had confirmed it just that morning. "Happy?" Bronson asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind as they watched the snow through their kitchen window. "Completely," she murmured, leaning back against his solid warmth. "You kept your promise." "All of them," he agreed, his hand covering hers on their growing child, "and I always will." Outside, the Montana wind howled, but inside their home, love had conquered all.